Good morning, good afternoon to everyone joining us today. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Isabel and I'm an Education Community Manager at ACCA. Our session today is designed to support you with the Advanced Audit and Assurance paper, where the expert tutor Ben will share his insights to help you with your preparation for the exam. The webinar is going to cover exam tips and techniques using technical examples, talking about the importance of mocks and how to utilize them during your exam practice. You will also have an opportunity to ask your questions live. Ben will be able to provide answers to the most asked questions from students. So hello, Ben. Just quick introduction. Nice to have you here today. But before
Thanks, Isabel.
I hand over to you, I'm just going to cover a few housekeeping items very quickly. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a few different buttons that you can use during the session. You've got a help icon on the left, and that will provide you resources and any information you need to resolve any technical issues you might experience. There are icons for the slides and media player. Please select both of those for the webinar. We've also got the attendee chat function, so you can engage with your fellow webinar attendees. And I'm very happy to see you all getting involved in that already. And I think from myself, Ben, and the other members of the ACCA team, we'd like to say happy birthday to Nicholas in Trinidad and Tobago. So remember that the attendee chat is all your posts here are visible. So please don't share personal details such as phone numbers or email addresses. You've got a resource list as well. The icon looks like a file symbol. So if you click on this, you'll be able to access resources relevant to today's webinar, including direct links. Remember, you can also rearrange your screen to suit you and resize the windows if you need to. And if at any point you can't hear us or the slides aren't progressing, just refresh your browser, as that usually helps. Registering for this webinar means you're going to be sent an email tomorrow with details of how you can listen to it again. So don't worry if you miss something or you have technical issues, you will be able to access the recording after the live event. So I am going to hand over to Ben in just a moment, and we'll be back at the end just to wrap up. But if you do want to ask ACCA or Ben questions, then please click on the Q&A button, which is in the middle icon at the bottom of your screens. But note, we do get a large volume of questions during these sessions, so we can't guarantee to respond to everyone directly, either verbally or via the web chat. But we hope that lots of the questions we'll share will be helpful to everyone. And I think as well, Ben's given a little bit of advice on how to phrase your questions in the attendee chat. Try and be as precise and concise as possible. Okay, with that in mind, I am going to pass over to you, Ben. Enjoy the session, everyone.
Thanks. Welcome, everybody. And just reiterating that message, if you do have questions you'd like me to answer at the end, and we'll have 10 minutes or so for questions. If you'd like me to answer your questions, try and get them in early. So don't wait until the end to ask your question, because then there'll be a flood of others in the queue ahead of you. So if you have things you'd really like to ask, please put them in the chat panel. Sorry, not in the chat panel, in the Q&A panel. And I'll do my best to get to your questions. And I'd also just reiterating that message, don't ask me to reteach you audit risk, right? Because it's too big to do in this sort of format. But if you have specific questions, then I will very happily answer them. So a bit of background about me and why ACCA work with me as their expert tutor for the AAA paper. So I've been working with ACCA for the last 4 or 5 years as expert tutor for AAA, delivering these sort of sessions and producing lots of content that goes onto the ACCA's YouTube channel. And one of the reasons for that is I've got a lot of relevant background. I've been teaching AAA for many years, and I now work with an organization called FME Learn Online. We're one of the ACCA's platinum providers for ACCA delivery online. And I work with small groups of students, giving them personalized coaching to get them through the AAA exam. I have worked as an examiner for audit for one of the other accountancy boards, the ICAW. So I've got a lot of experience in creating exam papers and managing the marking process. So I really understand what it takes, what the examiners are getting at with exam questions, and what it takes for you to write an answer that passes. And so I'll be trying to bring as much of that experience as possible into today's session. I also work with the London School of Economics, where I'm a head tutor for executive education programs. So I've got a wide range of experience that's relevant to this paper. So we have got 3 things we are going to be covering in today's session. The first of these, look at that picture with the guy lifting the box well and the guy lifting it badly. Right, that is about exam technique. And it's really critical for AAA. Right? If you've got good technique for this exam and okay knowledge, you will pass. If you've got amazing knowledge and rubbish technique, you will not pass this exam. Okay, this exam is all about exam technique. So we're going to focus on that in the first part of the session. We're then going to be talking about how important it is that you do mock exams, and particularly doing mock exams to time. And I'll be flagging some really good mocks for you to do as part of your exam practice. And then we'll have this Q&A session at the end. Some people pre-submitted questions. So what I've done with those is I've just brought in a few of the more common ones. And then we'll have time for your live questions as well. So exam tips and techniques for AAA. First tip, and this is going to lead us into some technique, is, well, the AAA exam is really predictable. Like, the same things always come up. There's always a big question on risk. There's always ethics. There's always a question on reporting. And there is always, always, always plenty of marks available for audit procedures. Normally 10 marks at least across the entire exam are for audit procedures. So that's where we're going to focus in this first part of the session, is on technique for audit procedures. Now, a good audit procedure will score you 1 mark, right? 1 mark per well-explained procedure. But to get that 1 mark, you have to do certain things, right? You have to tick certain boxes. It must be based on something from the scenario, right? There has to be some sort of fact or something that you are trying to verify from the scenario. So that should be your starting point. And actually, I'm saying this for audit procedures, but it's true for every single question in the AAA exam. Try and start your point with a fact from the scenario, because that helps you to make a scenario-specific point, which is really important for this exam. So we start with a fact from the scenario, but that on its own is not enough. You then have to think of a source of evidence that's going to help you to verify that fact. And ideally, it's a robust source of evidence, something third party. So not discussed with the client, getting a document of some sort. And you have to be specific about what that document is, and it needs to link to whatever fact it is in the scenario. And then that gets you half a mark. Okay, so stage 1, the fact and the evidence, generally gets you half a mark. The second half mark, getting you up to 1 mark per procedure, is explaining how the test works. Okay, you might refer to financial statement assertions, for example, like accuracy or valuation, but a bit of detail about how that test will work. So you can do a good audit procedure is, kind of 1 decent sentence or 2 short sentences is enough to get you that 1 mark. And here's an example of a good audit procedure. Okay, the fact is in bold, $50 million. Okay, $50 million have been paid, right? That's what we were told in the scenario, paid for something. So the source document is the bank statements. Okay, we'll confirm that 50 million did actually get paid out of the company's accounts by looking at the bank statements. And the explanation is at the end here that the 50 million is accurate and it has been recorded on the correct date. Okay, and that explanation at the end is the bit that helps you to get up to a full mark for that procedure. Now, I wanted to, I know that many of you have looked already at the Study Hub, but I wanted to just flag it to you as this great new resource that ACCA are providing to all students for the AAA exam now. And there's quite a lot of stuff in here for audit procedures. So when you go into this Study Hub, there's a couple of chapters that are relevant, or 1 chapter particularly that's relevant to audit procedures, and that's chapter 8. And so if you want to do background reading, and then chapter 8 of the Study Hub is good for you, although for AAA, the background reading isn't that important. What is more important is the practice questions and also some of the flashcard stuff. So there are some good questions in the study hub on audit procedures. I've highlighted them on here: Wexford, Thurman, and Malevich. And these practice questions will help you to hone your technique. So they're really useful for you to do as part of your exam preparation for audit procedures. Now, the other things that are useful in the study hub around procedures and for everything else are these flashcards. And these flashcards give you kind of a definition type area. So like data analytics, what is it? What you can do is go through the flashcards for Chapter 8 and for Chapter 9, because there's some stuff in there as well that's useful. And it makes sure that you know key definitions that are going to be helpful for you in the exam. Okay, what I thought I'd do is look at a past exam question with you on audit procedures and kind of show you some of the difficulties that arise around AAA audit procedures. Because what we've done so far, where I've said, get a fact, get some sort of source document, some sort of evidence, and some sort of explanation of how the test works, those three things, they're the same at AA, right? The lower level audit paper. So how is it different when you move up to the AAA exam? Well, it's the type of questions they ask you. Okay, it's not the technical content, because audit procedures are audit procedures, right? But it's the way they ask the question. So this question, they always seem to be doing this now, right? They'll say the principal audit procedures. And so what that means is you will only score marks for really good ones, the main ones, right? You won't get marks for saying things like add it up, right? Cast the schedule or something like that, which you might have done when you were doing the AA exam. But if you've got a long list of like standard, routine, boring audit procedures that you can write for any area, won't score for you here because they're asking you for the main big ones. Okay, and the thing they ask you to suggest audit procedures around, well, this one is about holiday pay obligation, right? That's never been tested before. First time we've seen it in an exam question. You go back over the study text that is on the study hub, and there is nothing in the study hub that tells you about auditing the holiday pay obligation. Okay, if you'd memorized the textbook, you would not know how to answer this question, right? Rote learning for audit procedures is pointless because they're not going to ask you what are the audit procedures for receivables or payables, right? They'll ask you about something really specific that isn't in the textbook, because what they're doing at AAA, and this is where it's hard, is they're testing your skill, not your ability to have learnt the textbook. They're testing, can you apply your understanding of auditing to come up with some sensible procedures for holiday pay obligations? So how do you do it? Well, you have to go into the scenario and you have to use your exam technique. So you go into the scenario and you look for relevant facts. And one thing we're told is it says that some of the employees have been duplicated in the payroll system. And if they've been duplicated, that means they're in there twice. That means we might have had double the holiday pay obligation for them. We might have double counted them. So as the auditor, we'd want to make sure that no one's been double counted. How can you do that? Well, get the list of employees that have been included and use data analytics to identify any duplicate names, because those should be removed. That's not in the textbook, but I've come up with that based on the fact that's in the scenario. It says they're entitled to a maximum of 3 days that they can roll forward for this holiday pay obligation. Because the holiday pay obligations, how much do we owe to our employees for holiday they haven't taken this year, but that they will take next year? Well, they can only take 3 days. So again, we can use something, data analytics is a really good tool here. We can look at all of the employees that have been included and use our data analytics software to identify any that have more than 3 days worth of holiday entitlement. Because those ones, well, we'd have to reduce them down to 3 days. And it says it should be adjusted for pay rises and changes in staff levels. So we can audit that by looking at HR records. What has been included for pay rises? Well, we can agree that to any contract documents that have been sent out to employees confirming the pay rises. So if it's included 5%, we should be able to agree that 5% pay rise back to any contract documents. And the changes in staffing levels, well, we can agree that to our HR records. So all of that stuff I've suggested there is based on facts that are in the scenario. No rote learning, it's all about skill, which is hard. And how do you get better at that skill? Practice, right? Practicing past exam questions will really help in this area. Okay, I think a lot of you have found the chat panel already. And I know there's a number of my students in this, my own students that are in this session, because I recognize some of the names that are in the list. But find the chat panel and you tell me, you type, what order do you do the questions in? 1, 2, 3, or is it 3, 2, 1, or 2, 1, 3, or 3, 1, 2, or how do you do it? So if you can find the chat panel, please, not the Q&A, find the attendee chat panel. And can you type in there, what order do you do the questions in, please? I've already had one of my students saying 2, 3, 1. Excellent. But I've got a lot of people who are saying 1, 2, 3. Quite a lot doing 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Most people are doing 1, 2, 3. Okay. And I guess I'm quite pleased at that. Right, the reason I'm quite pleased that lots of you are saying 1, 2, 3 is because I'm going to give you some great advice now that's going to maybe change what you do. My tip around question order is to start with questions 2 and question 3. And I'll explain why shortly. Okay, and I really want you to leave question 1 until last. And particularly within question 1, I want you to leave the risk part until the end. Now, why am I suggesting this? Well, AAA is brutally time pressured, right? It's unbelievably time pressured. It's ridiculous, right? They should give us 5 hours to do this exam properly, or even 6 hours, but they don't. They have 3 hours and 15 minutes. So we have to work within that constraint. Now, question 2 and question 3 will tend to have quite small scenarios, right? Maybe 1 or perhaps 2 exhibits. So 1 or 2 exhibits to read, and then maybe 2 questions to do for 20, 25 marks, right? That's question 2, same for question 3. Now, within a smaller question that has a smaller scenario, it is much easier to be disciplined with your time. Okay, question 2, you have 45 minutes to do it. Okay, so you spend your 45 minutes, you get that question done, you stick to your time, and you've done your 45 minutes, question 2 is done. You then press repeat for question 3. Because again, small scenarios, small number of questions, easier to stay on track. Question 1 will tend to have bigger scenarios, and there will be 4 or maybe even 5 exhibits of information for you to read, and perhaps 4 or 5 requirements for you to do. When you've got loads of information to read and lots of questions to do, it's much harder to stick to your timings. And so what I find when students start with question 1 is they often overrun massively in question 1. And then they do question 2, and they perhaps finish question 2. And then they get to question 3, and there's only 10 minutes left. And they have a tiny go at question 3, and then they don't pass the exam. Okay? But for that same student, had they done question 2, stuck to their time, question 3, stuck to their time, and then used the remainder of their time for question 1, they would have stood a much better chance of passing the exam. Okay, so this is my advice. You don't have to take it, but this is me seeing the exam as a game, right? It's a game where I have to pick up 50 marks. What is the most likely way for me to be able to pick up those 50 marks? It's if I stick to my time in question 2 and question 3, and then I do the more time-consuming bits at the end with the balance of my time. Okay, and the reason I'm saying leave the risk questions till last is those are the ones that are the most time-consuming. So I do them right at the end, having earned the easier, quicker marks first, playing the game. Okay, look at that beautiful picture on screen. It is still breakfast time, sort of, isn't it? Or brunchy time. And do you like waffles for your breakfast? I mean, we're all big kids, aren't we? Okay. Everyone loves waffles, right? They're sweet and delicious. Waffling is brilliant for breakfast, okay? But it is horrendous when it comes to the exam, okay? This is something we want to avoid hugely in the exam. You cannot waffle if you're going to get through this exam in time. But you've got a balancing act in this exam that is really, really challenging, right? Your answers need to be detailed. Like, they have to have enough depth to them, which is why some people waffle, right? You need enough depth, but the danger is that you err into waffling, right? Writing too much. And that balancing act is really, really challenging. Okay? And there's something the examiner has said in every set of examiner's comments and in every session that they have with tutors, okay, around this point of waffling. And what they've said is it's really obvious when a student has planned effectively. If they plan, they write precise answers that address the requirement with detail without going on for too long. If a student doesn't plan, their answers are very long and unstructured and full of waffle. Okay, and those students tend not to pass. Okay, so the examiner says this, and I say it as well, right? Planning is absolutely critical in AAA. And if you haven't done it in your previous exams, well, those exams were different. Like, this is a different challenge. Right? You do need to plan in AAA. This is a fully written exam. And this is not a technical knowledge exam. It's different to all your other ones. You need a different approach. So how do I plan? The first thing that I do when I get to the requirements is, and I start with the requirements, is I set up an answer structure using those requirements. I then go through the scenario exhibits and I actively read them. And what I mean by actively read is, as I read a piece of information, think about how that information is useful, and then I put it into my answer plan. Okay, so as I'm reading through the scenario exhibits, I'm also putting points into my plan. So my planning and reading time are kind of one and the same thing. And then I take that answer plan with my little notes from having read the scenario exhibits, and I turn those points into fully written answers. Okay, I don't have a plan and then my answer. My plan is the bones, it's the skeleton. And then I extend out each point in the plan so it becomes my answer. I noticed someone ask a question very early on about, should I submit my plan and then my answer? Well, no, because your plan becomes your answer. Okay, and that way you save time on the typing. Now, if you want to see this technique in action, there's loads of my videos on YouTube where you can see me doing this. And I'm going to be coming to the December 23 mock exam shortly, and you'll see me using this technique when you watch the debrief videos of the mocks, so you can see it in action. Okay, which brings us, great segue, Ben, brings us nicely onto the importance of doing mocks. Okay, and your mocks are critical training, right? Which is why I've used this picture. That's what I look like with my shirt off, by the way, when I'm wearing my training vest. Right, the importance of doing mocks. I'm an Arsenal fan. Right? And when I was putting these slides together, Arsenal were playing Man City at home. So I had to do these a little while ago. And those of you who are into football, you'll know the result, wouldn't you? You'll know the result. Arsenal won, right? Man City are generally regarded to be a much stronger team than Arsenal, but Arsenal won, okay? And Arsenal were the home team, right? If any of you are into cricket, you might be watching the Cricket World Cup at the minute, and there's one team that is smashing everybody else, right? And you'll probably know who that team is, because it's the team that is hosting the World Cup at the minute. It's India, right? India are absolutely destroying everybody. But the previous Cricket World Cup, the home team was England, and England won. What am I getting at here? Oh, It's that the home team generally wins in sport because the home team feels more comfortable. Okay. That, by the way, is me without a beard. Look, I mean, that was a while ago. I was at the FA Cup final watching Arsenal win the last time they won the FA Cup. Anyway, the home team usually wins in football and in loads of other sports. And the reason for that is because they feel more comfortable. If you're on home ground, you know what you're doing, you feel more relaxed and you perform slightly better, right? I want you to make the exam environment your home ground, right? So that you are more likely to win, right? So how do you make the exam your home ground? Well, you are practicing exams in the format of the real exam, okay? And that's the practice platform. When you go on the practice platform, you will see, and I've highlighted them here, there are 3 A grade past exam papers for you to do. And these are A grade because they're the current syllabus, right? So it's September 22, December 22, and March, June 23, which is one paper. Those ones are the current examiner style, current exam format, right? And I want you to do those on the practice platform so you get used to the tech. And I want you to do it to time. Okay? Loads of students don't practice their mocks to time, and it is such an important exam skill. So when you're doing them, set yourself a timer on your phone. You've definitely got one of these, haven't you? Set yourself a countdown timer, 3 hours and 15 minutes, and be brutal with yourself. The more you feel that exam pressure of time, the more it feels normal when you do the real exam. And don't wait until 3 days before the exam to start doing mocks. Okay, well, I'm trying to encourage you to do your mocks early, and that way you are doing more practice of your exam skill. And I've already said this, doing them in the practice platform means you get more familiarity with the tech, right? All right, you can say it's Word and Excel, right? It's a word processor and a spreadsheet function, but it's not, right? It's, say it quietly, I can say this because I don't work directly for ACCA, it's not as good as Microsoft Word. It doesn't have all the functionality. It's not as good as Microsoft Excel because it doesn't have all the functionality. But if you get used to the functionality, you get better at using it. And this, I think, is really significant information to share with you. You probably are aware of it already, but in case you're not, most people who don't pass AAA are really close to passing. There's a really heartbreaking number of people who score 47, 48, or 49. And that's heartbreaking for those students. But it also, I look at it and go, had that person had slightly better technique, had they been slightly more on home ground when they were doing the exam, they might have got 50 or 51. Had that person practiced a couple more mock exams to time in the practice platform, they may well have passed. Okay, so honestly, really, really works, really, really helps. Please take that message on board. Okay, so some free resources for your exam prep. So who doesn't love free resources? The first, and I've already mentioned this, the pre-December 23 mock. So these are good questions in the examiner's latest style, and they have amazing debrief videos with a really gifted, talented, expert AAA tutor delivering those debrief videos. Yeah, it's me. So the questions are available on the practice platform from the 13th of November. And my answers, you'll be able to get them through the practice platform, and the debrief videos are available on the 17th of November via the ACCA's YouTube channel. Now, I'd strongly encourage you to do that mock as a proper exam, and then use my debrief videos to help you to review it afterwards. And the reason there's a gap in those dates is to try to encourage you to do the exam before using the debrief videos. But you might find it helpful to kind of work together with me using the videos if you struggled in any of the questions. But I'd be doing that as my first mock. And if you're an independent student, this is, I mean, you might be studying with a training provider that gives you its own program, but I'd be doing that as your first mock if you're an independent self-study student. And then the 3 that I showed you earlier, you're doing those afterwards, because this one has a big, comfortable, warm, friendly arm around your shoulder, which is me helping you with the debrief videos. So you can build technique in this mock that you can then apply in the remaining mocks. The technical articles, please forgive the typo. The technical articles for AAA, and I know someone's asked a question about this, so I will be coming to it. The link is in the resources section, but I understand that link wasn't working, so I've just put it in the main chat panel. Worth having a read. I have a podcast which takes real-world issues and discusses them from an auditing perspective and relates it to the AAA exam. It's really good for revising on the go. So if you want to get to my podcast, you can scan that QR code and you can get to my podcast. It's on Spotify and all other main podcast channels. I've got a load of free videos on YouTube, which I get lots of messages from students after the exam telling me they were really helpful. So make sure you check those out. There's lots of my stuff on there. And if you follow me on LinkedIn, I do things like give you my exam tips for the exam sitting that's coming up. I do that in the week before the exam. So if you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll get that come through to you. Okay, the Q&A session. And I've done pretty well. That was first bit. It was supposed to be half an hour. And I'm literally on the minute. This is my smug face. Okay, so these were the pre-submitted questions for AAA, and I've kind of drawn them into three sections, right? First set of pre-submitted questions was around study tips. So I put the link for the technical articles. How important are they? And whisper it for AAA. They're not very important. Not as important as they are for something like AFM or SBR, where you will be examined on the detail of those technical articles. In AAA, the technical articles are more there for background context. Okay, so they're interesting, they are useful, but they're not business critical for you to kind of memorize. Okay, so I'd encourage you to use the technical articles to support your studies. I'm doing some question practice and I want something else to do. Right, so I've done a couple of questions. I'm a bit bored of question practice. I've already listened to an episode of Ben's podcast and I can't stand that guy's voice anymore. I want something else, so I'll read a technical article. Do I have any tips for self-study students? So make use of all of the free stuff. So ACCA have given you, there's lots of stuff on the ACCA's YouTube channel, which is great. Also make use of I give away quite a lot of my videos from my course for free. So make sure you use my YouTube channel and podcast. There's a wealth of free stuff out there. But something that's really important if you're a self-study student is motivation. Okay. You haven't got a training provider putting an arm around your shoulder or giving you deadlines to submit things and keep you going. So it can be hard to remain motivated as a self-study student. So I would encourage you to buddy up with other students. Okay, there's loads of WhatsApp groups out there that you can join or find other students who are doing your paper and just keep in touch with each other. Right? How are you getting on? Have you done this section yet? Have you done that question? Yeah, I found this bit hard. Why don't we swap answers and have a review of each other's and give each other some feedback? Okay, so buddying up, really, really helpful, really important. So on WhatsApp and on Facebook, there are loads of ACCA study support groups. Make use of them. If you're a resitter, I've got 2 tips for you, right? Loads of students ask me, what can I do differently next time? Okay, 2 tips for you if you're resitting. The first one is that you've got to get back to where you were and beyond it. So you might have scored 48 last time. And for a lot of people who score 47, 48, they go, I only need to do a little bit more for the next time. So they might have done, I don't know, 40 hours of preparation in September. But for December, they only do a few hours because they're almost there and they just need a little top up. And their mark goes from 48 down to 35 in their second attempt, right? You've got to get back to where you were and beyond it, which means you've got to do the amount of time and effort you did before, but then go further. Okay, so you have more work to do for your resit than you did for your first attempt. Okay, so that's tip 1. You've got to put the work in. My second tip for you is you've got to change something, right? You can't just do the same approach, because if you follow the same approach that you did last time, why would it be any different this time around? Right, so make some changes. Okay, and two changes that I think are really helpful and effective. The first one is up your focus on question practice. Right, dial down the knowledge and rote learning and dial up the doing questions to time and marking your answers. Okay, when I say doing a question, I mean actually doing it under exam conditions to time. Okay, so that's one simple tip. Second simple tip is when are you studying? When during the day? Okay, most students study in the evening after work, when they're tired, when something else will get in the way. Okay, when a friend says, shall we go to the cinema? Okay, most students study in the evening, and their study is the balancing figure of their day, and it often gets lost. Okay, so a really simple tip for you is to reverse the priority of your day. Okay, get up early. If you're going to do an hour of study, do it before work, right? Or do it before everything else that you're doing in that day, and that way you're much more likely to actually do it. Okay, next set of tips of questions were around exam technique. So I always get lots of students ask me this. Do I have to quote the names and numbers of financial reporting standards and auditing standards? And this is a really easy one to answer. No. And actually, do not do it, because it costs you time to write out the name of the standard and its number, and it earns you 0 marks. So it's a complete waste of time. So don't bother doing it. You do need to perhaps quote relevant bits from the accounting standard. So if in an audit risk question, they're accounting for something incorrectly, you'll need to use the relevant information from the accounting standard, but you don't need to quote what standard it comes from. How many points do you need to write? Well, it's pretty simple in AAA. Okay, virtually everything is 1 mark per well-explained point. Okay, and a well-explained point is probably 2 sentences. So if it's a 10-mark question on ethics, let's say, you need 10 well-explained points, and a well-explained point is 1 or 2 sentences. Okay. Now there are 2 exceptions to that rule. Audit risks and ROMs are 3 marks per well-explained point. Okay, so you need a bit more information. You need a full paragraph for a well-explained audit risk or risk of material misstatement. Those are 3 marks. And business risks, well, I can't count. Business risks are 2 marks per well-explained risk. Okay, so there you again need a full paragraph. Not quite as much information as for an audit risk or a risk of material misstatement, but yeah, a relatively full paragraph. So if it's business risks and it's 10 marks, you need 5 business risks because they're 2 marks per well-explained risk. Do you need to show workings for your calculations? Well, generally in AAA, your calculations are nothing more complicated than a percentage. And with something like a percentage, it's either going to be right or wrong. Right? You're not going to get, so it's, you'll get half a mark for doing a calculation and using it. Okay, and actually, that's a really relevant point. You only score marks in AAA if you discuss your calculation. So if you have an appendix that's full of beautiful numbers that you don't discuss in your word processor, in your briefing notes or whatever, you'll get nothing for them. It was a complete waste of time. So all those beautiful workings in your spreadsheet don't really get marked. It's only if you use the number in your discussion that you score for it. And because I would encourage you to only have really simple numbers in your answer, you don't really need to show workings because you only get half a mark for each one. They're either right or wrong. If you are doing something a little bit more complicated, like a more in-depth analytical procedure, then maybe show a little working. But in general, if it's a percentage, you can just put it without workings. Okay, technical articles. Sorry, not technical articles, technical questions. So I had a few pre-submitted things around around new areas. Okay, so there are new sustainability standards. Are they examinable? Well, around sustainability and quality management, there are a couple of technical articles on the ACCA's website, which I've already put the link to. That's as up to date as you need to be. Things that are happening in the weeks and months before the exam, you don't need to worry about. Right? The syllabus that you're sitting for AAA was set in January of 2023. And it covered things that was kind of up to that point. So you don't need to worry about anything that's been recently released unless there's a technical article on it. How important is financial reporting? Very, 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 very. And it has become more important in recent exam sittings. Generally, 10 marks, maybe 15 marks in the AAA exam are reliant on your knowledge of financial reporting standards. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to earn loads of marks for quoting financial reporting standards. It's that, well, how it gets tested, there'll be some audit risks that will be where the company is accounting for something incorrectly. And for you to spot the incorrect accounting, you need to know what the correct accounting looks like. So it is important that you go back over your SBR notes. Okay? It's not the SBR exam. You're not going to be tested in the same level of detail that you would have had to do for SBR. You're not going to have to do calculations around financial reporting, but you do need a good awareness of all the financial reporting standards that were examinable in SBR. And if you haven't done SBR yet, I would strongly consider doing it first. Maybe too late for that advice, but... And do I need to learn ratios for analytical procedures? I get a lot of people asking this. Do I need to learn things like receivable days, payable days, the quick ratio, current ratio? And my answer is sometimes they're helpful, right? In an audit risk question, if they're having a problem around receivables, it could be helpful for you to calculate receivable days, okay? But it's unusual. You can generally... If they ask you for analytical procedures in one of the questions, it's generally enough for you to just do simple calculations. Okay, so simple percentage calculations. So I wouldn't worry too much about learning long lists of ratios, and I would just focus on doing simple numbers, like gross profit margin or the percentage increase in revenue. These are the things that the level of detail they want you to go into with these sort of things. Okay, that was it for the pre-submitted questions. Hope you found that bit useful. I'm now going to go into the Q&A box and answer questions. So Paul asked right at the start, will I lose marks if I leave my answer plan? Now, I already kind of addressed this with your answer plan becoming your real answer. But if you run out of time and it submits your plan because you haven't had time to write it up, that's no bad thing, Paul. You might get some marks for it. The only question where there are format marks, communication marks, was one of the professional skills, is in question 1. So your plan would need to sit outside of your briefing notes. So if you've got a bit of a plan and then your briefing notes start with your answer and that whole thing gets submitted, not a problem. But if it's briefing notes and you do part A and part B and then it's got your answer plan to part C, you probably would lose some credit. Okay, Yasir has asked, best technique to approach ROM questions when it states evaluate and prioritize the ROMs. Okay, so for me, in a ROM question where I'm having to identify risks from the scenario, I actively read the scenario. As I spot a risk of material misstatement, something I think they've done wrong, I will put it in my answer plan. I then look at the numbers. Are there any numbers that I can add to it to support it? Is there any extra analysis I can do, explaining the incorrect accounting treatment? And then I will always assess the materiality of it because you have to do that with every audit risk or ROM. And that's how I develop my ROMs. If you want to watch me doing that, you can see it in the debrief video to question 1 from the December 23 mock. And then once I've planned out enough ROMs, so I might need 4 or 5. So once I've got to 4 or 5, I then look at them and go, which 2 do I think are the biggest? Which 2 can I prioritize and explain why they're the most significant ones? I then put those, I copy and paste and put those as my top 2 and explain why they're my top 2. Javed, you've asked, is it mandatory to attempt all requirements? Yes, absolutely critical that you answer every question. Javed, the reason for that, if you think of another exam like financial management, like FM, in that exam, there's always generally a question on cost of capital or MPV, that often comes up. And if someone knows what they're doing in MPV, they can get 15 out of 15 in that question. They get full marks. So if they've scored 15 out of 15 in one question and they miss out another question elsewhere, they'll still pass. With AAA, nobody gets full marks in the questions. Right? Even the students who win prizes. So I had in September, I had 3 national prize winning students One of my students was the top scoring student in India and I think 4th globally. And he scored in the mid-70s, right? Even the students who come 4th out of, getting on for 10,000 students only score in the 70s. Right? Nobody scores 95 in this exam. It's not like tax, right? So even when you do really well in a question, you score 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10. So even in the ones you do brilliantly in, you don't accumulate enough marks to be able to compensate for a question that you miss out entirely. So you have to attempt all questions, right? Spread yourself over all of the questions. So Saliwa has asked, should I have a conclusion? Okay, conclusions. If in doubt, yes. Right, have a conclusion because they're often worth a mark and they're often worth professional skills marks. The requirements that generally require a conclusion are discuss and evaluate. Okay? If it's discuss or evaluate, generally there will be a mark for a conclusion. But it's not just for any old thing, right? You can't just write, this is a conclusion and get a mark for it. Right? For it to be a conclusion, it has to conclude on whatever you were asked. So if it's evaluate the matters that should be considered before accepting an engagement, right? The conclusion should be, well, this is about accepting an engagement. The conclusion should be accept it or don't accept it. Or discuss how significant this impact is. Your conclusion is, it's really significant or it's not very significant. Cara has asked, how do I prepare for reporting questions? And Cara, you could have asked this about any type of question. How do you prepare, right? You need a little bit of knowledge, right? So you do need to go over your notes and make sure you understand the contents of an audit report. You understand the different types of audit opinion and the different types of paragraphs there can be in an audit report, right? That's what you need to know. So a little bit of knowledge and then a lot of question practice. So applying that knowledge to past exam questions. So you see how this stuff gets tested and you start developing techniques that help you for that type of question. And that applies to all areas of AAA. Make sure you've got the little bit of knowledge that you need and then spend your time focusing on question practice. Diana has asked, for the first question in AAA, so the big case study question, immediately after the introduction, I understand that calculating and justifying the materiality level attracts no marks. Diana, I don't know who has told you this, but you have been misled. Materiality, which should be, so in question 1, you should have briefing notes, a little introduction saying, this is what I'm going to write. And then you have in your ROM section or your audit risk section, the first paragraph is materiality. Right, and what you do in there is you calculate your materiality range, and the partner might have said do it on PBT or revenue or assets. Right, so you calculate your range. You then set your materiality level, generally at the low level, and explain why you've set it at the low level. This is a high-risk audit because it's a newly listed company and therefore there's greater public interest. Right, so you've got your calculation of your range, you set the lower level and you justify it. And that earns you 3 marks, Anna. So whoever told you it's worth no marks is absolutely pulling your leg. And it's good that you asked that question because now everybody knows. If you do that paragraph, you earn 3 marks. It's lovely. Okay, Syed Prasad has asked, how do I prioritize my risks? Okay, the answer is it doesn't really matter. Okay, the marks are for picking out 2 risks and explaining why they're your most significant ones. If they aren't the same 2 that the examiner has chosen, it doesn't really matter. The marks are for doing it. As long as you can come up with a reason that justifies it. So like this, I've picked out this risk as prioritized because I know it's an error. The accounting treatment is definitely wrong, right? I know they've got this wrong, so I'm going to make sure I focus there. And that's a good justification. Or this one is particularly material. Materiality is $1 million. And this error is, I don't know, $50 million. It's huge. And because it's so huge, I'm going to prioritize it. Or this error really impacts a key user of the financial statements, like a particular shareholder. So I've prioritized it. Doesn't really matter. which ones you prioritize. The marks I present are for doing the prioritization. Okay, we've got about 10 minutes left, so I'll keep going. Okay. Samuel has asked, should I focus on technical knowledge, making sure I learn the textbook, or should I start practicing questions? Samuel, I think you know the answer. Right? Technical knowledge, you need a little bit of it. It's necessary, but not sufficient. Exam application skill, business critical. So focus your time there, right, on the question practice and the exam skill. Aditya, this is a great question. Thank you for asking this. Aditya, what do you do if you haven't got the technical knowledge that is needed for a question that comes up? Okay, Aditya, that almost certainly will happen to you in the exam. Okay, they'll ask you about something random that you've either forgotten or you haven't studied. Okay, and the technique is to go, well, firstly, everyone's going to struggle with this. Everyone, right? Because this is a bit weird. So it's fine that I'm feeling a bit uncomfortable because everyone will be feeling like that. And if I write even something useful, even a little bit useful, the markers are going to be probably more generous in awarding marks because most people are going to do nothing or write utter rubbish. And if I write something at least half decent, it's probably going to get marked generously. Okay. So where do you go for information? I haven't got the technical knowledge that's required for this question, but they definitely, Aditya, they definitely will give you some scenario information that is relevant to answering that question. 100%. So your job is to go into the scenario and find things that look like they could be useful for answering that question and discuss those things, right? And you're trying to bring it back to the right context of, it's asked you about data analytics, but you've forgotten what that is, but you pick up some things that could be relevant and discuss them, and you try and bring it back to the requirement, and you at least pick up some marks. Okay, Aditya, don't spend too long on it, though, because if you've got no idea what you're doing, and this sometimes happens, student has no idea in a question, and so they write an enormous amount, because if they write an enormous amount, surely somewhere in here, there'll be some mark scoring points. Okay, so make a couple of points, move on. Okay, because the student who writes an absolute load still scores nothing, and they waste lots of time. So don't let that be you. Nonchedo has asked, what's the best technique? Reading the question first or the scenario first? Okay, the technique that works best, Nonchedo, is to go straight to the requirement, set up your answer plan, and then read the scenario information and add notes into your plan. Okay, that is the best way of doing it, because then when you're reading the scenario, you know what you're looking for. You know why you're reading it because you know the questions. Saliwa, how many risks for a 15-mark question? I haven't got enough fingers. Right, 15-mark risk question. So the way that I do it, Saliwa, is if it's my ROM question or my audit risk question, I know that there's 3 marks per well-explained ROM, okay? But I know I'm going to get 3 marks for materiality. So I take my 15, I minus 3, take those off, so I'm left with 12. 12 marks I'm trying to earn. And there are 3 marks per well-explained ROM. So I go, well, 12 divided by 3, I can do that in my head, that's 4 ROMs. So I'm trying to come up with 4. That's all I do. And 4 well-explained risks. What you sometimes find students do is 15 marks, so they try and come up with 15 risks and just write a little bit about each one. Okay, that is a dreadful technique. Okay, so take the number of marks, minus 3, divide it by the number of marks per risk, which is 3, get to your number of risks, and then fully develop 4 risks, or 5, or whatever. Machek Billy. How long do I spend in each question on planning? Right, so question 2 and question 3, you get 45 minutes in total to do the question. I tend to spend, and you'll see me doing this in the debrief videos for the mock, I spend about 20 minutes, maybe 25. So I aim at about 20 minutes. 20 minutes for setting up my answer plan, reading the scenario actively, and adding notes to my plan. Okay, so about 20 to maximum 25 minutes for reading and planning. And then I spend the remaining 20 minutes typing up the points that are in my plan. Okay, so that's about half and half. I know most of you are going to be looking at your computer at the minute and going, what? I spend 3 minutes planning and 42 minutes writing. Oh, no, I don't. I spend 0 minutes planning and 45 minutes doing the rest of it. Okay. The reason I spend so long planning is that then allows me to write a really short, focused, precise answer that only includes content that is relevant to answering the question. No waffle. Okay. It saves me time on the writing if I plan effectively. Okay. So I spend 20 minutes at least planning for question 2, same for question 3. And in question 1, I have about an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes to do the question. So I spend about 40 minutes planning and the rest of the time writing. Okay. Srivadini has asked, what's the best approach for revising and practicing AAA for this last month? I mean, I've kind of said this stuff already. Little bit of knowledge, a lot of question practice. And the better way to do that, Srivadini, is to do the questions, right? I have a past exam question. I do it properly, my exam conditions. And if there are any bits that I don't know how to do, any technical knowledge gaps, I then go back to my textbook and I read up on it. Okay, so I'm doing it that way round. I'm doing it the exam-focused way. Okay, so I'm doing a past exam question, and if there are knowledge gaps, I go and fill them. I'm not doing it as learn all of the knowledge and then spend a little time on the question practice. Okay, it's reversed. Question practice, go fill your knowledge gaps. Sorry, I've jumped through a few questions here. Aditya has asked, will I get 1 mark for stating this risk is material based on the threshold, or is the limit capped to 3 marks for a few risks? So Aditya, with materiality, you have to apply it to every single risk that is in your answer. Okay, so to all 5 risks, you have to explain whether they're material or not by relating them to your materiality level. So you have to keep doing it. There's a professional skills mark available for doing that. Saliya, are there any marks for the introduction to your briefing notes? It's one of the communication skills marks, okay, the presentation of your answer. So yes. Swetha, how are the professional marks awarded for the questions? So the communication skills marks are very formulaic. There's 4 communication skills marks in question 1 of the exam. And there are some really good resources on the ACCA's YouTube channel explaining how you get those 4 marks. But broadly, it's for following the instructions, setting up a nice answer structure, having brief subheadings, having a professional format to your answer. But critically, you must make sure you answer the question that's been asked and follow any guidance you're given. Follow any instructions from the partner. Those are those 4 marks. And then the rest of them, the professional skills marks across the whole exam, they're for things like, well, what the examiner has said is you kind of get these marks. A good student gets these marks without specifically trying to earn them. Okay? Because if you write a detailed answer with depth, you will earn the professional skills marks without specifically focusing on them. So the one thing I would say to you, Swetha, to try and earn professional skills marks is develop your points fully. If you develop your point, you are likely to be writing the things that will earn professional skills marks. But there's loads of guidance on the ACCA's YouTube channel about earning professional skills marks. Okay, we've got 2 minutes left. So I'll just answer one more. Sophia has asked, how do I approach a question such as matters to be considered? Because it's so open-ended. I don't know where to start. Okay, Sophia, it's a really good question and a useful tip for everyone. Okay, you don't know where to start. It's an open-ended question. Right? Lots of people will be feeling like that. The place to start is the scenario. Okay, so in the scenario, they will give you the ideas that you then need to explain and develop in the context of the question. Okay, so you don't know where to start, go to the scenario and you will find relevant facts that will be helpful as starting points for your analysis. Okay, everyone, thank you for your attention in today's session. Thank you for all of the questions. We had loads of really, really good questions. Just wanted to wish you best of luck for the AAA exam that you've got coming up. And if you take one thing out of this session, let it be you should focus your attention on question practice and doing the questions fully, doing them to time, because that way you get the maximum amount of exam technique benefit, which is the critical thing for passing AAA. So best of luck with the exam. I'm not sure if I'm handing back over to you, Isabel. I think I am. I'll hand back over now.
Yeah, I was just going to wrap up because we do need to bring things to a close. But thank you so much, Ben. I think that was a really useful webinar. And I think your last bit of advice was a great note to end on. Remember, to everyone who has registered for this webinar, you will be getting an email shortly, probably tomorrow, with details of how you can watch it again. So finally, a big thank you to Ben and the team who've supported us in the back end, answering questions and delivering this session. And good luck, everyone. We wish you all the best for your exams. Bye-bye.